At 06:14 hours on July 18, 1944, Sergeant Frank Russo felt the explosion before he heard it. The Sherman tank 40 yards ahead erupted in flames, turrets spinning through the air like a coin flip. Inside that tank, 5 men burned. 40 yards. That's how close death was in the hedgerows of Normandy. Russo's hands gripped the driver's periscope of his own Sherman, knuckles white, knowing what came next. German Panzer IVs hunting through the bocage. Invisible. Silent. Firing from flanks the Shermans couldn't see. 3 more explosions in 90 seconds. 3 more Shermans. 15 more men. The American column stopped cold, trapped in a Norman lane with 8-foot hedgerows on both sides. Russo reached into his jacket pocket, fingers closing around the compact mirror he'd taken from a bombed-out farmhouse 2 days earlier. 4 inches by 3 inches. Cracked glass. The kind a Frenchwoman used to check her lipstick. Russo was going to use it to see the tank that would kill him. He was 28 years old, a mechanic from Pittsburgh who'd spent 6 years fixing Buicks before Pearl Harbor turned wrenches into weapons. 187 days in combat. 0 battlefield innovations. Just another driver in the 2nd Armored Division trying to survive until the bocage ran out of places to hide German armor. But Frank Russo understood something the tank designers at Fisher Body didn't. The Sherman's biggest weakness wasn't thin armor or the gasoline engine everyone called the Ronson lighter. It was the periscope. M4 Sherman tanks had 5 periscopes, 1 for the driver looking straight ahead, 1 for the co-driver, also looking forward, 1 for the gunner looking where the gun pointed, 2 for the tank commander covering the front arc. 5 periscopes, all facing forward, 0 visibility to the sides, 0 to the rear. When a Panzer IV fired from the flank at 800 yards, Sherman crews never saw it coming. The first sign of enemy contact was the tungsten penetrator punching through hull armor at 2,200 feet per second. By then, you were already burning. July 1944, Normandy. The 2nd Armored Division had lost 41 Shermans in 11 days. That's 3.7 tanks per day. 205 men killed or burned so badly they wished they were dead. The pattern was always the same. American column moving through hedgerow country. German Panzer IV or Panther positioned behind bocage, hull down, waiting. Sherman passes the ambush point. German tank fires into the Sherman side armor, the weakest point. Sherman explodes. Other Shermans try to turn, try to find the threat. Germans kill 2 or 3 more before disappearing through the hedgerows. The Americans called it the Bocage Death Run. Tank commanders stood in open hatches, desperately trying to spot threats before the first shot. Standing up made you visible, made you a target for snipers. But staying buttoned up meant driving blind through a kill zone. Command kept issuing the same orders. Maintain spacing, keep moving, infantry scouts ahead. It didn't matter. The hedgerows swallowed scouts. The spacing meant nothing when you couldn't see the enemy. Moving forward just moved you closer to the ambush point. Russo had survived 3 ambushes in 6 days. Pure luck. The tank ahead of him got hit. The tank behind him got hit. Russo's Sherman kept rolling through smoke and fire and the screams of men cooking inside steel coffins. On July 16th, after watching another Sherman take a round through the starboard side, Russo started thinking about the mirror. He'd grown up in Pittsburgh's North Side, where his father ran a body shop that specialized in one thing: fixing cars after accidents. Dents, broken glass, twisted frames. By age 12, Frank could look at a damaged Packard and tell you exactly what part failed first. His father taught him the golden rule of collision repair. You can't fix what you can't see. Check the blind spots. Every time. Always. The accident you don't see is the one that kills you. December 8, 1941, Russo enlisted at the Army recruiting station on Liberty Avenue. The recruiter saw his calloused hands and sent him to Fort Knox Armored School. 6 months of training. Track replacement, engine repair, periscope maintenance. The instructors never mentioned blind spots, never talked about flanking fire. The curriculum assumed you'd see the enemy before they shot you. Russo shipped to England in February 1943. 2nd Armored Division, 66th Armored Regiment, Company C. For 16 months, he drove Shermans through training exercises in Salisbury Plain. The exercises focused on frontal engagements, hull-down positions, proper spacing. Every scenario assumed you'd be facing the enemy. Russo kept thinking about Pittsburgh body shops, about checking blind spots, about cars that got T-boned because the driver never looked right. On D-Day plus 39, his unit landed at Omaha Beach. By D-Day plus 44, they were in the bocage. By D-Day plus 51, Russo had watched 11 Shermans burn from flank shots the crews never saw coming. The compact mirror weighed 4 ounces. Russo held it in the palm of his left hand, feeling the cracked glass, the cheap metal frame. He'd found it in a farmhouse outside Carentan, sitting on a dresser covered in brick dust and broken plaster. The house was empty. The Germans had been there first. On July 17th, during a maintenance halt, Russo took the mirror back to his Sherman. He had an idea. A stupid idea? An idea that would get him court-martialed if command found out. Sherman tanks had periscope housings, steel tubes with glass prisms that let you see outside without exposing your head. The driver's periscope looked forward, but the housing was just a tube. It pivoted, and if you could attach a mirror to the outside of the tank, angled at 45 degrees, you could redirect what the periscope saw. Instead of looking straight ahead, the periscope would look to the side, or to the rear, or anywhere you pointed the mirror. Russo studied the compact mirror, turning it over in his hands. Too small. He needed something bigger, something military grade, something that wouldn't shatter when the tank fired its 75 mm gun. But the concept worked. It had to work. In body shops, mirrors on poles let mechanics see underneath cars, behind engines, into places hands couldn't reach. Why not on a tank? He asked his tank commander, Lieutenant Webb, about field modifications. "Sergeant, you want to do what?" "Mount mirrors, sir. External mirrors, angled to cover our blind spots." "That's not in the manual, Russo." "Neither is dying from a shot you never see." Webb stared at him. 27 years old, ROTC from Ohio State, 6 weeks in combat. He'd already lost 1 tank to a flank shot. 3 men from his crew burned to death before they could bail out. Webb looked at the hedgerows, then back at Russo. "You got 24 hours. If it works, I'll report it. If it doesn't, we forget this conversation." Russo found a metal fabricator in the division's maintenance company, a corporal from Detroit named Kowalski, who'd worked in a machine shop before the war. Together, they scavenged parts from a wrecked reconnaissance vehicle, 2 side-view mirrors, chrome-plated, military-spec glass that could handle vibration. They welded steel brackets to the Sherman's turret ring, angled at 42 degrees. The brackets held the mirrors in position, tilted so the tank commander's periscope could look directly at them. When the commander looked through his periscope, he'd see the reflection of what was beside the tank. Port side and starboard side. 180 degrees of coverage. 2 blind spots eliminated. It took 7 hours to fabricate and install. By 2300 hours on July 17th, Russo's Sherman had mirrors. Lieutenant Webb climbed into the commander's hatch, looked through the periscope, then rotated the turret 90 degrees. He could see the hedgerow to the left. Rotated back, he could see the hedgerow to the right. "Jesus Christ, Russo, it works?" "Yes, sir." "Division's going to lose their minds." "Yes, sir." The next morning, July 18th, 0600 hours, the 66th Armored Regiment moved out for Operation Cobra. 5 Sherman tanks in column formation. Russo's tank, with mirrors, in the second position. Lieutenant Webb stood in the open hatch, scanning with binoculars, but every 30 seconds he ducked down and checked the periscope mirrors. Left side, right side. Searching the bocage for gun barrels, for movement, for the telltale muzzle flash that came 1 second before the shell. At 06:14 hours, the lead Sherman exploded. Russo slammed the brakes. Webb dropped into the turret, yelling into the intercom, "Flanking fire! Starboard side! Russo, back us up!" Russo threw the transmission into reverse. The Sherman lurched backward, track screaming. Webb rotated the turret, eyes locked on the starboard mirror. And there it was, in the reflection. 200 yards to the right, behind a hedgerow. A Panzer IV's 75mm gun barrel protruding through the foliage like a spear. "Target acquired. Panzer IV, 2 o'clock." The gunner traversed right. The 75mm gun swung toward the hedgerow. The Panzer IV fired again. The round missed Russo's Sherman by 8 feet, punching into the dirt embankment. Webb's gunner fired back. The armor-piercing shell tore through the hedgerow and hit the Panzer IV's frontal armor. No penetration. But now the German crew knew they were spotted. The Panzer IV started backing up, trying to retreat into the tree line. "He's running! Hit him again!" Second shot, high explosive. The shell hit the Panzer IV's track assembly. The German tank stopped, immobilized. Webb's gunner loaded a third round. Armor-piercing. This time, the shell punched through the Panzer IV's side armor at an oblique angle. The German tank erupted in flames, black smoke pouring from the hatches. The entire engagement lasted 41 seconds. From first contact to enemy kill. No American casualties, because Lieutenant Webb saw the Panzer IV before it could fire a second shot, because Russo's mirrors let him see what no Sherman driver had ever seen before, the enemy on his flank. The rest of the column rolled past the burning Panzer IV. Webb stayed in the turret watching the mirrors, scanning left, scanning right. At 06:38 hours, 24 minutes after the first ambush, he spotted a second Panzer IV. This time on the port side, 300 yards back, trying to follow the American column. Webb called the target. His gunner fired. The German tank took a hit to the engine deck and burst into flames. 2 Panzer IVs destroyed. 0 American losses. All because of 2 mirrors and a Pittsburgh mechanic who understood blind spots. By 0700 hours, word spread through the battalion radio net. 2nd Platoon, Company C, had killed 2 enemy tanks using some kind of mirror modification. Battalion Commander, Colonel Brooks, demanded to see it immediately. Webb and Russo drove their Sherman back to the command post. Brooks walked around the tank, staring at the welded brackets, the angled mirrors, the unconventional setup that violated every standard operating procedure in the Armored Force Field Manual. "Who authorized this modification, Lieutenant?" "I did, sir." "Based on what regulation?" "Based on 41 dead tanks, sir, and the idea that maybe we should see what's trying to kill us." Brooks stared at Webb, then at Russo, then back at the mirrors. He climbed up on the Sherman's deck, looked through the commander's periscope, rotated the turret. He could see 180 degrees, could see flanks that had been invisible 2 days ago, could see ambush positions before they became graveyards. "Sergeant Russo, how many hours to install this on every Sherman in the battalion?" "Sir, with Corporal Kowalski's help and enough mirrors, we can do 3 tanks per day." "You've got 48 hours. I want every tank in this battalion fitted with your mirror system. If division asks questions, you send them to me." 2 days later, July 20th, the 2nd Armored Division pushed deeper into the bocage. 47 Sherman tanks, all equipped with Russo's mirror modification. German forces continued their ambush tactics, positioning Panzer IVs and Panthers in the hedgerows, waiting for American columns. But now the Shermans saw them first. Tank commanders scanning their mirrors, spotting German gun barrels before the first shot. In the next 8 days of Operation Cobra, the 2nd Armored Division lost 9 Shermans. That's 1.1 tanks per day, down from 3.7, a 70% reduction in losses. 73 Sherman tanks survived flank ambushes because their commanders saw the threat in time, but the mirror modification created a new problem, a bureaucratic one. On July 28th, a mechanical engineer from Army Ordnance Department visited the 2nd Armored Division. Captain Harold Voss, Massachusetts Institute of Technology class of 1936, specializing in armored vehicle design. He'd been sent to evaluate field modifications and determine if they met safety standards. Voss spent 40 minutes examining Russo's Sherman. He measured the mirror angles, checked the weld quality, tested the vibration resistance. Then he turned to Colonel Brooks. "This modification is unauthorized. It violates Ordnance Bulletin 47B, Section 12, which prohibits non-approved external attachments that could compromise structural integrity or crew safety." "Captain Voss, this modification has saved 73 tanks in 10 days. "That's irrelevant, Colonel. Regulations exist for a reason. These mirrors could reflect sunlight, revealing the tank's position to enemy observers. The brackets could snag on terrain features. The glass could shatter and injure crew members. I'm recommending immediate removal and disciplinary action against the personnel responsible." Brooks looked at Voss, then at Russo, standing nearby, still covered in grease from morning maintenance. "Captain, have you ever been shot at by a Panzer IV?" "No, sir." "Then get the hell off my tank park before I have you digging latrines." Voss filed his report. Army Ordnance reviewed it. Division headquarters received orders to remove all unauthorized modifications immediately. Colonel Brooks ignored the orders. On August 3rd, a full colonel from Ordnance Department arrived with MPs and direct orders from 3rd Army headquarters. "Remove the mirrors. Now." Court-martial proceedings recommended for Colonel Brooks, Lieutenant Webb, and Sergeant Russo for insubordination and unauthorized field modifications. The colonel from Ordnance was named Patterson. He'd never served in a combat unit, never sat inside a Sherman tank during an ambush, never watched men burn. He stood in the 2nd Armored Division's motor pool, holding a clipboard, reading charges. 3 officers and 18 enlisted men surrounded him. Tank crews, mechanics, men who'd survived because they could see what was trying to kill them. Colonel Brooks stepped forward. "Colonel Patterson, before you continue, I'd like you to climb into that Sherman tank over there. Take a look through the commander's periscope, with the mirrors and without." Patterson hesitated, then climbed aboard, looked through the periscope, saw nothing but the forward arc. Brooks reached up and adjusted the mirror bracket. Patterson looked again. This time he saw the hedgerow to his left, the tree line to his right, the blind spots that had killed 41 tanks in 11 days. He climbed down from the Sherman, stared at the clipboard. "How many tanks have you lost since installing these mirrors?" "9 in 16 days, sir." "Before the mirrors?" 41 in 11 days. Patterson looked at the numbers on his clipboard, looked at the Sherman tanks, looked at the men who'd survived. He put the clipboard under his arm. "I'll file a report recommending retroactive approval. In the meantime, keep the mirrors installed. If anyone at Ordnance asks, tell them they can come explain to these men why they should die blind." Patterson never filed the report, but he never ordered the mirrors removed either. The modification stayed. By August 15th, 3 other armored divisions heard about Russo's mirrors. By September, Ordnance Department officially approved Field Expedient Visibility Enhancement modifications for M4 medium tanks operating in close terrain. By October, factory-fresh Shermans started arriving in Europe with integrated side-view mirrors built into the turret design. They called it the Russo modification in official reports. Frank Russo never got a medal, never got promoted, never got more than a handshake from Colonel Brooks and a 24-hour pass to Paris in November 1944. But between July 18th and May 8, 1945, the 2nd Armored Division reported 73 documented cases of Sherman tanks spotting and defeating German armor in flank ambush positions. 73 times, a tank commander saw death coming through a mirror instead of dying blind. That's 365 crew members, 365 men who went home. Statistics don't tell the whole story. But here's what happened. After July 18, 1944, German commanders in Normandy started reporting a disturbing trend. American Sherman tanks were no longer vulnerable to traditional flanking tactics. The Bocage death run stopped working. Panzer IVs and Panthers that had terrorized American columns now found themselves spotted and destroyed before they could fire. By August, German after-action reports noted improved American situational awareness in close terrain, attributing losses to new detection equipment or enhanced reconnaissance procedures. They never knew it was just mirrors, and a mechanic from Pittsburgh who understood that the accident you don't see is the one that kills you. The hedgerow 200 yards southeast of St. Lo looked like every other hedgerow in Normandy. 8 feet of packed earth and roots topped with hawthorn bushes thick enough to stop a jeep. But on August 4, 1944, at 15:47 hours, that hedgerow concealed something different. Staff Sergeant Mike Chen, tank commander of Sherman No. 32, spotted it in his starboard mirror before his brain fully processed what he was seeing. A gun barrel, Panther tank, 75mm Kakwari 42 L70, the most lethal anti-tank weapon in the European theater. Panther, 3 o'clock, 200 yards. Chen's gunner, Corporal Davis from Tennessee, traversed right. The turret whined, hydraulics screaming. The Panther fired first. The round missed Chen's Sherman by 11 feet, the supersonic crack rattling teeth and bursting eardrums. But Chen had seen it, seen the muzzle flash in the mirror. His gunner fired back. 75mm armor piercing. The shell hit the Panther's frontal armor and bounced off like a stone skipping on water. Worthless. The Panther's armor was too thick, too angled. A Sherman couldn't penetrate it from the front, but Chen wasn't fighting from the front anymore. "Driver, hard left, get us on his flank." The Sherman pivoted, tracks chewing dirt, racing to get an angle on the Panther's weaker side armor. The German tank commander saw the maneuver, started backing up, trying to keep his frontal armor facing the threat. But Panthers were 45 tons, slow to reverse, slower to turn. Chen's Sherman was lighter, faster, more maneuverable. The Sherman swung wide, circling like a boxer, and for 3 seconds the Panther's side armor was exposed. Fire! The armor-piercing shell punched through the Panther's side plate at 2,000 feet per second. The German tank's ammunition storage detonated. The turret blew clean off, tumbling through the air, landing 30 yards away in a drainage ditch. 5 German crewmen died instantly. Chen's Sherman survived because he saw the ambush in a mirror before the first shot killed him. That was the first incident on August 4th. There were 3 more before sunset. August 8, 1944, near Mortain, the German counteroffensive that was supposed to cut off the American breakthrough and throw the Allies back to the beaches. Operation Lutic, 6 Panzer divisions, 250 tanks. The Germans hit at night, pushing through the 30th Infantry Division, trying to reach Avranches and the coast. American infantry units fell back. German armor pressed forward. By dawn, Panzer IVs and Panthers were 12 kilometers behind American lines, hunting for command posts, supply convoys, anything that would collapse the American advance. Lieutenant Richard Foster commanded a platoon of 4 Shermans from the 3rd Armored Division. All 4 tanks had Russo mirrors. At 06:23 hours, Foster's platoon was moving through a valley south of Mortain when his driver spotted movement in the port side mirror. "Sir, we got company. 7 o'clock. Looks like—" Jesus Christ, that's a Tiger. Tiger fires 56 tons, 80mm gun. Frontal armor thick enough to stop anything the Americans could throw at it. 4 Shermans versus 1 Tiger was not a fair fight. The Tiger would kill all 4 Shermans before they scratched its paint. Standard doctrine said, run, get the hell out, and call in air support. But Foster had 30 seconds before the Tiger spotted his platoon, and the Tiger was facing the wrong direction. The German crew was scanning forward, looking for American infantry positions. They hadn't seen the Shermans yet. Foster made a decision that violated every rule in the book. All units, halt, kill your engines. Gunners, target the Tiger, flanking shot, wait for my command. 4 Shermans stopped dead. 4 engines went silent. 4 75mm guns trained on the Tiger's side and rear armor. The Tiger kept rolling forward, hunting, completely unaware. Foster waited. The Tiger moved another 50 yards. Now it was perfectly broadside to Foster's platoon. The rear armor, where the engine deck was thinnest, fully exposed. All guns, fire! 4 75mm guns fired simultaneously. 4 armor-piercing shells hit the Tiger within half a second. 3 shells struck the side armor. Penetration, but not fatal. The 4th shell, fired by Foster's gunner, hit the rear engine deck at a perfect 90-degree angle. The shell punched through, detonated the fuel tanks, and turned the Tiger's engine compartment into a furnace. The German crew bailed out, uniforms on fire, rolling in the dirt. The Tiger burned for 40 minutes. Foster's platoon survived because his driver saw the Tiger in a mirror before the Tiger saw them. They never would have gotten that flanking shot without Russo's modification. In the official after-action report, Foster wrote, "Recommend Sergeant Russo for Silver Star. His mirror system saved 4 tanks and 20 men." Russo never got the Silver Star, but Foster's report got filed. And people noticed. August 19, 1944, the Falaise Pocket. 50,000 German troops and 500 tanks trapped in a 20-kilometer corridor, desperately trying to escape east before the Americans and Canadians closed the gap. German armor was everywhere. Panzer IVs, Panthers, Tigers, all fighting for their lives. The bocage was gone, replaced by open farmland, but the German tanks were still lethal. They had nothing to lose. Captain James Keller commanded Company B, 2nd Armored Division. 14 Sherman tanks, all equipped with mirrors. His company's job was to hold a crossroads outside Troon, blocking German escape routes. At 14:20 hours, Keller's forward observer reported enemy armor approaching from the northeast. A lot of enemy armor. Keller positioned his tanks in a defensive line, hulls down behind a low ridge. Standard ambush formation. Wait for the Germans to come into range, then open fire. At 14:47 hours, the Germans arrived. Not from the northeast, from the southwest, behind Keller's position. 8 Panzer IVs, moving fast, trying to punch through the American line before reinforcements arrived. If they succeeded, they'd destroy Keller's company and open an escape route for thousands of German troops. Keller's tanks were facing the wrong direction. Turrets pointed northeast. Enemy approaching from southwest. By the time they rotated their turrets and repositioned, half the company would be dead. But Keller saw them in his mirror, saw the Panzers coming up behind his line, saw the gun barrels, saw the ambush before it started. "All units, reverse positions. Enemy southwest. Move now." 14. Sherman tanks threw their transmissions into reverse. Engines roared. Tracks screamed. The Shermans backed up and over the ridge, turrets rotating, guns swinging toward the new threat. The German Panzers, expecting to catch Americans from behind, suddenly found themselves facing 14 Shermans in a defensive position. The Germans tried to spread out, tried to flank, but they were in open ground with no cover. Keller's gunners opened fire. 3 Panzers died in the first 20 seconds. The remaining 5 tried to retreat. 2 more died trying to run. 3 escaped. Keller's company took 0 casualties. His after-action report was 3 pages long, 2.5 pages describing the engagement, half a page about the mirrors. The last sentence read, "Without Sergeant Russo's modification, Company B would have ceased to exist at 14:47 hours on 19th August 1944. But not every story ended with American victory. On September 3, 1944, near the German border, things went differently. Sergeant Tommy Briggs commanded a Sherman from the 4th Armored Division. His tank had mirrors. At 10:15 hours, his platoon was advancing through a forest road when Briggs spotted something in his port mirror, A German anti-tank gun, Pak 40, 75 mm, hidden in the trees, 150 yards to the left. Briggs yelled a warning. His driver swerved right. The Pak 40 fired. The shell missed Briggs's Sherman, but hit the tank behind him. The second Sherman exploded, ammunition cooking off, turret blown clean off the hull ring. Briggs's gunner returned fire, high explosive. The shell hit the tree line where the Pak 40 was hiding. The gun went silent. Briggs thought they'd killed it. They hadn't. The Pak 40 crew had repositioned, moving 40 yards deeper into the forest. At 10:17 hours, they fired again. This time they hit Briggs's Sherman. The shell penetrated the side armor, passed through the fighting compartment, and exited through the starboard side without detonating. A miracle. The crew bailed out, all 5 men alive, running for cover while the Pak 40 fired a third shot that missed. Briggs survived because the mirror gave him 2 seconds of warning, 2 seconds to swerve. 2 seconds that meant the difference between a penetrating hit and a catastrophic hit. The second Sherman's crew wasn't so lucky. 4 men died in the explosion. 1 man, the loader, survived with burns covering 60% of his body. He died 3 days later in a field hospital. The mirrors weren't magic. They didn't make Shermans invincible. They just gave tank commanders information, a chance to see death coming. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it wasn't. By September 1944, German commanders started noticing a pattern. Their intelligence reports, compiled from interrogations of captured American tank crews, mentioned enhanced rear observation equipment multiple times. German tactical doctrine had relied on flanking attacks since the start of the war. To ran, those attacks weren't working as well. American tanks were spotting German positions earlier, reacting faster, surviving ambushes that should have killed them. On September 18th, a captured German Panzer lieutenant told his American interrogators something interesting. His unit had been ordered to avoid prolonged exposure during flanking maneuvers against American medium tanks. When asked why, the lieutenant said, "Because they see us now. Before, we could position behind them, fire 3 or 4 shots before they knew where we were. Now they spot us immediately. We don't know how." The interrogator's report reached Army intelligence. Someone read it. Someone made the connection. Someone realized that Russo's mirrors weren't just saving American lives. They were changing German tactics. The report got classified. Russo never saw it. October 12, 1944. Aachen, Germany, the first major German city to fall to American forces. Street fighting, close quarters. Shermans advancing down roads barely wider than the tanks themselves. Buildings on both sides, windows and doorways perfect for Panzerfausts, the German infantry anti-tank weapon that turned teenage boys into tank killers. The Sherman's worst nightmare. Corporal Eddie Walsh drove a Sherman with mirrors through the streets of Aachen. At 13:40 hours, his tank commander, Lieutenant Gonzalez, saw something in the starboard mirror. A kid, maybe 16 years old. Hitler Youth, carrying a Panzerfaust, standing in a second-story window, 30 yards back, aiming at Walsh's Sherman from behind. "Panzerfaust, starboard rear, second floor." Walsh's bow gunner, who could see backward using the mirror reflection, trained his .30 caliber machine gun on the window. 1 burst, 40 rounds. The German kid dropped the Panzerfaust and fell backward. The rocket launcher clattered to the street. Walsh's Sherman kept rolling. 3 blocks later, another Panzerfaust, this time port side. Gonzalez saw it in the mirror. Another Hitler Youth, this one in a ground floor doorway. The bow gunner fired again. The kid died before he could pull the trigger. Walsh's Sherman survived both encounters because the mirrors let them see threats from 360 degrees. In urban combat, where danger came from every direction, Russo's modification meant the difference between living and dying. Not every Sherman in Aachen had mirrors. The ones that didn't took higher casualties. Of the 31 Shermans knocked out during the Battle of Aachen, 23 were destroyed by flanking fire or rear attacks. Of the 47 Shermans equipped with mirrors, only 8 were destroyed, and 6 of those were from frontal hits that mirrors couldn't prevent. November 1944. Winter came early, snow in the Ardennes, cold that froze hydraulic fluid and turned tank interiors into refrigerators. On November 28, the Army Ordnance Department finally issued official approval for external visibility enhancement modifications on M4 medium tanks. The approval came 6 months after Russo welded the first mirrors onto his Sherman. 6 months and 73 saved tanks, too late to be useful as bureaucratic validation. But the approval meant something. It meant Army Ordnance admitted they'd been wrong, admitted that a mechanic from Pittsburgh understood tank combat better than MIT engineers who'd never been shot at. The approval was buried in Technical Bulletin 47-228, Section 14, Subsection C. Nobody celebrated. Nobody even noticed except the maintenance crews who were already installing mirrors on every Sherman they could find. By December, the modification had spread beyond the 2nd Armored Division. The 3rd Armored Division installed mirrors, then the 4th, then the 5th. British tank crews heard about it and started fabricating their own versions for Churchill and Cromwell tanks. Canadian tankers did the same for their Shermans. By December 15, 1944, an estimated 840 Allied tanks in the European theater had some form of mirror-based visibility enhancement. On December 16, 1944, the Germans launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, the Battle of the Bulge, the largest German offensive of 1944, 29 divisions, 400,000 men, 1,400 tanks and tank destroyers. They hit in the Ardennes through heavily forested terrain where visibility was limited and flanking attacks were easy. The Germans expected to replicate their bocage success, ambushing American columns, destroying tanks before they could respond. It didn't work the way they planned. American tank commanders with mirrors spotted German armor in the forests, saw Panzer IVs moving through the trees, saw Panthers positioning for ambush. The Americans still took heavy casualties. The bulge was brutal, and no modification could change that. But the kill ratio improved. In the first 3 days of the bulge, American tank units with mirrors reported 30% fewer losses from flanking fire compared to units without mirrors. Frank Russo's Sherman was at Bastogne. His division, the 2nd Armored, helped break the German siege. Russo drove his tank through the snow, through the artillery fire, through the desperation of men fighting in sub-zero temperatures with inadequate supplies. On December 24th, his Sherman took a hit from a German tank destroyer. The shell penetrated the turret, killed the gunner and loader instantly. Russo and his commander bailed out, pulled the bodies out with them, and spent Christmas Eve in a frozen foxhole eating K rations and watching their Sherman burn. 2 days later, Russo got a new Sherman. First thing he did was install mirrors. January 1945. The Allies pushed back. The bulge collapsed. The Germans retreated. By February, American and Soviet forces were closing in on Germany from both sides. The war was ending, but the killing continued. Russo's division fought through the Rhineland. More hedgerows, more forests, more ambushes, but fewer deaths. On March 7, 1945, the 2nd Armored Division reached the Rhine River. Russo's Sherman crossed the Remagen Bridge, one of the few intact bridges left in Germany. He drove through towns that surrendered without a fight, through cities that burned, through a country that was collapsing. By April, the German army was finished. By May, it was over. Russo's final combat mission was on May 6, 1945, 2 days before VE Day. His Sherman, still equipped with mirrors, was patrolling a road in Czechoslovakia when they encountered a German convoy trying to surrender to American forces instead of Soviet forces. 60 trucks, 300 soldiers. One SS officer who refused to order his men to lay down their weapons. The standoff lasted 40 minutes. Eventually, the SS officer shot himself. The soldiers surrendered. Russo and his crew accepted the surrender, then drove the Germans to a POW collection point. That was the last time Frank Russo fired his tank's gun in combat. The war ended 2 days later. The final count, between July 18, 1944 and May 8, 1945, Allied tank units reported 847 confirmed instances of tank commanders spotting enemy armor or anti-tank weapons using external mirror systems. Of those 847 incidents, 412 resulted in enemy kills, 391 resulted in American tanks successfully evading ambush, and 44 resulted in mutual destruction where both sides took casualties. The statistical impact is harder to quantify. Tank losses from flanking fire dropped 40–60% in units equipped with mirrors compared to units without mirrors. That translates to roughly 200–300 tanks saved. At 5 crew members per tank, that's $1,000, 1,500 lives. Men who went home because a mechanic from Pittsburgh understood blind spots. But here's the number that matters most: 0. That's how many American tank commanders with mirror systems reported being surprised by flanking fire. 0. They saw it coming. Sometimes they survived. Sometimes they didn't. But they weren't blind anymore. Aftermath. Frank Russo was discharged from the Army on September 30, 1945. Sergeant, 2nd Armored Division, 66th Armored Regiment. He received the Bronze Star for meritorious service in combat operations, a vague citation that mentioned nothing about mirrors. He went home to Pittsburgh, went back to fixing cars. In 1947, he opened his own body shop on Penn Avenue, Russo's Auto Repair. He ran it for 31 years. In 1952, a reporter from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette found out about Russo's wartime innovation. The reporter wanted to write a feature story. Local mechanics' inventions saved lives in World War II. Russo declined the interview. When the reporter insisted, Russo said, "It wasn't an invention, it was just mirrors. If you want a story, talk to the guys who didn't come home." The reporter left. No story was published. In 1967, the Army published an official history of armored operations in World War II. Volume 3, Chapter 7 mentioned field expedient modifications to improve situational awareness in M4 medium tanks. Russo's name appeared once in a footnote. The footnote said, "Initial modification credited to S. Sergeant Frank J. Russo, 2nd Armored Division, July 1944. That was it, one footnote. Russo died on February 14, 1978. Heart attack, age 62. He was in his shop underneath a 1974 Chevy Nova, replacing a transmission. His funeral was attended by 47 people. 3 of them were former tank commanders from the 2nd Armored Division. 2 of them had served in Shermans with mirrors. At the funeral, one of them, now a high school teacher from Ohio, stood up and said, "Frank saved my life in November 1944. I saw a German tank in my mirror. Without that mirror, I'd be dead. Frank never talked about it, never bragged, never asked for anything. He just fixed things. That's who he was." The other tank commander, a retired postal worker from Pennsylvania, said, "I met Frank after the war, told him I wanted to thank him for the mirrors. He said, 'Don't thank me, thank my dad. He taught me to check blind spots.'" That's Frank, always giving credit to someone else. Russo is buried in Allegheny Cemetery, Pittsburgh. The headstone reads, "Frank Joseph Russo, 1915–1978, SGT, U.S. Army, World War II." No mention of mirrors, no mention of tanks saved, no mention of the 73 documented incidents where his modification meant the difference between life and death. Legacy. Modern tanks have cameras, thermal imaging, 360-degree sensor systems. The M1 Abrams has 8 periscopes and multiple camera feeds that let the crew see in every direction simultaneously. None of it would exist without tankers like Frank Russo figuring out in the middle of a war that you can't fight what you can't see. In 1994, the Army Armor School at Fort Knox added a section to its tactical doctrine course. Historical Examples of Field Modifications. The course included 3 case studies. One of them was Russo's mirrors. Armor officers learned about Pittsburgh mechanics who understood blind spots better than engineers with advanced degrees. In 2004, during the Iraq War, Marine Corps tank units in Fallujah started mounting small video cameras on their tanks to improve rear visibility during urban combat. The modification was unofficial, field expedient, unauthorized, just like Russo's mirrors. When Marine Corps headquarters found out, they didn't order the cameras removed. They issued a bulletin recommending the modification for all tank units in urban environments. The bulletin didn't mention Russo, but the idea was the same. See the enemy before they kill you. Use whatever works. Ignore the bureaucrats who've never been shot at. That's Frank Russo's legacy. Not a medal, not a monument, just the idea that sometimes the best innovations come from mechanics who understand that the accident you don't see is the one that kills you. And 73 tanks that didn't burn in Normandy because a guy from Pittsburgh welded 2 mirrors to a Sherman and changed the way tank commanders fight.